Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2020, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And this week we have a great episode, but before we dive into that, I want to thank those of you who keep Talk Nerdy chugging along. Remember, Talk Nerdyism will always be 100% free to download, and that's because of the support from listeners just like you, especially in episodes like today, where I have sold 0 ads. So it's very important that you guys continue to support the show. It's really awesome because it means that I still get paid for my work, even on the weeks where the companies that I work with to sell ads haven't been able to do so. So this week, I want to thank the top supporters of the show, who include Michael Gaucher, Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, Mary Neva, Pasquale Gelate, Sinai, Ulrika Hagman, Dudas Infinitas, The Zombie Drummer, David J. E. Smith, and of course, Brian Holden. Thank you all so very much. And remember, you can also support the show by visiting carasantamaria.com, and you'll see a bunch of options there. You can find my Patreon page. You can go to the Talk Nerdy store, which I've just completely redone. And you can pick up some cool Talk Nerdy swag. Even get yourself that Killer the Science Dog shirt you've been wanting. I know you want it. Yeah. All right, guys. So this week is a really great one because I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Ramesh Srinivasan. He's a professor of information studies and design media arts at UCLA, and his newest book is Beyond the Valley: How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow. You may remember several years ago when Ramesh and I had a chat. Here is a new conversation, I think, for a newer world, and you'll learn all about his newest book, Beyond the Valley. So without any further ado, here he is, Dr. Ramesh Srinivasan. Well, Ramesh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be back with you, Cara. I have had such a great time talking with you over the years, so I'm excited to be back.
Also, you write too many damn books. I can't keep up with you.
Well, thanks. I do my best. I have a lot to say, and a lot that I want to share.
So for people who maybe joined Talk Nerdy after you were last on the show, before we dive into your newest book, Beyond the Valley: How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow, let's talk a little bit about what it is that you do. Let people know kind of where you work and what your position is.
Yeah, so I'm a professor at UCLA. I've been on the faculty at UCLA since 2005, and I'm a hybrid of an engineer trained in artificial intelligence and machine learning and applied mathematics on the one hand, but the other side of me is very much a social scientist, and increasingly, I would say, a humanist. You know, I'm very interested in how the technologies that we are creating can potentially benefit everybody, can uplift, our country and our world, and how do we ensure that that the technologies of tomorrow are in the best image of ourselves as human beings? So, that kind of requires me to be a storyteller and an anthropologist, something like an ethnographer at least, and to ask at times even philosophical, conceptual, and theoretical questions about everything from artificial intelligence to automation to the gig economy to obviously disinformation and the so-called fake news phenomenon to questions of internet access and connectivity and what is or is not made possible when we simply sign on to the internet in a naive sense. So all of those questions are questions I'm able to tell through my travels. I work with different communities, both across our country. It could be working class communities, like worker communities. It could be indigenous communities, but I also work with communities all over the world. And for this new book, Beyond the Valley, I did field work in over a dozen countries, on multiple continents: Asia, South America, Africa, Europe, and North America. So it's just really fun to tell a story about technology that really is more inclusive of different people's voices.
I think more and more, obviously, it's becoming so important, in this kind of globally connected world, and also in this world where academic endeavors are more and more connected, more and more multidisciplinary. I mean, I still think there is a place for these really intense specialists. I think that's how we get, obviously, very, very specific science done. But that said, I think a lot of people are starting to become much more interested in an approach that's similar to yours. I think my approach has become more similar, and you're starting to see more graduate students who want to be more well rounded and kind of bring other areas of expertise together to tell a unique story or have a unique perspective. So I would love to know, like, number one, how did you get there? Like, what did you study in school? How
Yeah.
did you kind of craft that journey? But also, number two, if along the way you have sort of any advice for maybe people are just now starting out in college or just now trying to figure out what they want to do if they decide they go to graduate school, what kinds of things they can do to be more prepared for a multidisciplinary career.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Cara. I think both your path and mine are somewhat similar, right? You're an excellent communicator. You're a journalist, but you're also a totally legit scientist, and you are facilitating these conversations based on your own background as a trained scientist, but also with that kind of intention of having greater dialogue and democratizing, access to or understanding of knowledge and science and technology. And that's why
Hmm.
we are talking. And for me, I was motivated by very similar values. I mean, I have undergraduate and graduate degrees in engineering, my bachelor's and master's degree from Stanford and MIT, respectively. And I think what I realized and I saw even as an undergraduate, but certainly in graduate school, was that a lot of engineering was being taught without necessarily a deep understanding or analysis of the effects of technology outside of that fairly transient experience of a user,
Mm,
a user involved, engaged in technology, what we call human computer interaction, which basically kind of starts and ends at an understanding of, hey, does this technology make sense? What's the best way for the technology to be usable? Does it stress people out? What might be a better way to design an interface or a system so it's more elegant? Those are certain kinds of human oriented questions. But as we know all too well, the effects of scientific innovation and technological innovation are far more deeply felt in within larger scale systems that in many cases could not, and I don't blame any engineers or scientists for this, they're not part of the discipline. I mean, it's felt in ways that are far removed from our training in those fields, right? So, like
yeah.
an AI system and its impact on, for example, the policing and criminal justice system. That's not something and a deep analysis of the criminal justice system to design technologies that are better for certain values that we want the criminal justice system to look like is not something you learn in engineering school. So I think that I think it's really important that we have people who have disciplinary chops and training, like yourself, like myself, I feel to some extent. But I also think the power of us being public communicators and and listening to different voices in different fields is really the key here. So in my case, I saw these disconnects. I saw how, many of those who are responsible for connecting our worlds via the internet in certain ways are disconnected from that world. And again, that's not to malign them. We are who we are, and we are always, biased based on who we are and biased based on our training and the disciplinary
Hmm.
boundaries of our training. But now more than ever, I just encourage students to take classes in not only in fields like, in STEM fields, so important, science and technology, engineering, mathematics, but also classes in the social sciences and even at times in the humanities. And they themselves can draw those connections through their experiences of taking those classes, much like I was fortunately able to do. And I will say that eventually, and we are slowly adapting, universities are adapting. I mean, I've been talking to the dean of social sciences here at UCLA multiple times. I'm part of a committee to try to implement something of like a data and society master's program. We already have a super cool institute at UCLA called the Institute for Society and Genetics, right? So we're thinking about these things relationally. On our universities, we have to start building disciplines and divisions or just spaces of really interesting open dialogue so we can make sure that our different forms of training are informed by one another. And therefore, we can contribute to the greater good. I mean, we're public educators at the end of the day. The reason I wrote this book, Cara, Beyond the Valley, is I wrote it like a journalist. It's not an academic book. I mean, it is in the sense that it's published by MIT Press. It's been the top selling book for MIT Press, but I wrote it in around the medium of storytelling and short sentences, lots of examples, asking questions, talking to very mainstream figures. I talked to a lot of mainstream political and media figures. I was able to launch the book on MSNBC, on Morning Joe, and it's gotten tons of, and I wrote and I spun out a bunch of mainstream media op-eds from the LA Times to Wired to the Guardian to the Financial Times. I tried to use the book as a platform to engage us all in a conversation of how do we get to a digital world, a technological world that lifts all of us up, not just some at the cost of others, but can kind of collectively uplift our worlds. And that's really what science and technology in its best moments is all about. As you report on, I'm an avid listener to Talk Nerdy myself.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. Oh my gosh, really? As I look through Beyond the Valley, the thing that strikes me immediately, the thing that, is the thing that, I would love to focus on for some of this show. And I'm interested to see if that's also the topic that you're most drawn to, or if, there's obviously so much more there. But this idea of, we throw around words a lot, right? We throw around words like democratizing the internet, and we throw around words like, I don't know, like this idea of this kind of like post oppressive future where everybody has free access, and once people have access, all of a sudden the future is just going to be better by virtue of people having free access. But of course, we know that there are these entrenched systems, and we know that there's this kind of institutional sexism, institutional racism. There are these powers, institutional kind of I guess maybe I shouldn't say that, but like a lack of social mobility, and this very like strong rich versus poor divide.
Absolutely.
There are places, where people have power, and they're going to, whether it's organized and specific, or whether it's kind of a passive moving train, maintain power through oppression. And so as I'm looking at Beyond the Valley, I'm seeing example after example of times where what we think of as this digital movement that should be very freeing has actually been used to oppress voices, has actually been used to suppress thought. And actually there are whole misinformation campaigns that have existed that have basically destroyed lives.
Yes, absolutely. At times, we sort of, this is these problems that we're starting to feel politically, socially, in terms of how we even receive information. At times, they are a function of the reality that many of those who are developing, algorithmic and machine learning systems are, like all of us as humans, are biased based on our own professional training, but also, in a huge way, and you're one of the great people speaking out about this, are also demographically not representative of our larger country and world because of entrenched systemic biases, for example, against women in science and technology. I was a graduate student at Harvard when Lawrence Summers, made those obscene comments, basically saying that women by birth are just not equipped to be as good at science and technology. And we see those sorts of implicit biases, at least in the representation of women. This is just one example, or people of color, in the worlds of engineering and AI. Look at the data on women's participation in higher level management and engineering positions within Silicon Valley. Look at the data around, racial minorities and other forms of diversity. So part of this is a function of the reality that if I am who I am and I represent a small slice of the overall population, both nationally and globally, I'm going to build systems based on how I view the world. And I give a number of examples of that in Beyond the Valley, from simple, silly things like an application built by a company in St. Petersburg, Russia, that's supposed to make people's faces look more beautiful, and ended up turning President Obama's face, whiter and younger.
Oh,
Again,
God.
based on encoded concepts of beauty in the machine learning algorithm. So, we're building these inequalities first as a function of who is doing the building and designing, and second of all, based on data sets that we're feeding into learning algorithms. And those data sets themselves reflect the inequalities of our world. So if I fed some sort of algorithm, say I'm building an AI system, which is going to happen and is starting to happen, to replace human resources workers, and I feed that AI system a bunch of data about the world, about the job market, say in science and technology jobs, that AI system is going to learn from the reality right now, the very unfortunate reality that it's disproportionately male. So what we found out, there's been a lot of good reporting on this, including in the journal Science itself, and then reported out by a lot of science journalism publications, and even like publications like The Guardian. Found out systematically men are selected over women, even with slightly worse CVs than women, for those jobs by the algorithmic system. So we're seeing the spillover of these disconnections between the so-called connectors and the rest of us. They're spilling over into the systems that are going to determine and shape our lives today and tomorrow. And we're seeing that with criminal justice. We're seeing that with predictive policing. We're seeing that with automated systems. We're seeing this again and again and again. And we're seeing, if you will, fairly malicious actors try to exploit this, realizing that by pumping, the digital world, the online world, full of hateful speech, conspiracy theory speech, deliberately non-factual content, deep fake content, that you can go viral that way. You can go viral because the algorithmic systems, I remember we talked about this before, Cara, the algorithmic systems privilege the sensational, they privilege the spectacle, because the more attention you give to what you see on a platform like Facebook or YouTube, the more you give them what they want, which is your attention. And more attention means more data, and that can be transacted into some of the most astonishing revenues and corporate valuation numbers that we've ever seen. We're talking about multiple $1 trillion+ valuated companies. And we're also even looking at companies like Uber that are actually bleeding money out. They're not profitable. But if you look at their SEC filings, and FTC filings, you can actually see their goal is not to make money, it's to capture and enclose the market around all forms of data involved in transportation, so that they can then launch new sorts of industries like automated vehicle industries and so on. So none of that is problematic, right? The machine learning, I mean, a lot of it is, but the technological part of it doesn't have to be inherently problematic, right? Like we should be building great AI, great machine learning, great ways to use applications to take disaggregated people and bring them together. The problem is the design processes, the lack of auditing, and the lack of consideration around digital literacy and labor issues. Those are the real issues. So that's why none of those are about engineering per se. They're about the social and political questions and values by which we have to, as a society, make decisions for our collective interests. We have to start believing that when my neighbor is doing well, I'm doing well. And there's empirical evidence showing that, but we have to get out of a zero-sum mentality when it comes to the technologies that define our lives and our future.
I have to ask, is it as simple? I mean, I know the answer is no, but these issues that we see that are sort of like built into the system when we're talking like maybe just from the engineering and design perspective, right? Development of algorithms, development of apps and software, and the kind of engines, AI, for example, these deep learning kind of approaches. these engines that are utilized obviously in all of these, social settings, like we talked about criminal justice, predictive policing, things like that. Is it really as simple as like, these things are being designed by bros in like fleece vests in Silicon Valley, by like white cis straight dudes who just are like not dialed into social justice issues? Or is it something much more complicated than that?
Yeah, great question. It's not as simple as that, of course. It's not simply a question of having designers be so-called woke. It's not about that. And actually, what I want to do is even move past some of the rhetorical sort of, gaslighting that occurs when people are seen as bros versus, social justice warriors versus all of these kind of pernicious categories. And instead think about, how we want to treat one another, just kind of get back to like something about the humanity of it all. But yeah, on a technological level, Cara, it's really complex. I think what we need to do is do a lot of A/B testing. I mean, you as a scientist know all about that, right? You basically want to infuse different new kinds of independent variables, right? Like what does it look like if it's the status quo versus a more diversified design engineering kind of team building it? How does that impact the overall dependent variable of some kind of not having a racist outcome, if you will? But it's multiple steps, right? It's about data sets, it's about design practices, it's about auditing. This is a key point. Before these systems make determinations and it's too late, and people who are vulnerable or have less power in our society are put in an even worse position by a technology that most people treat as just sort of neutral and unbiased. We need people in the middle to be auditing these systems, and that those are jobs of the future, in my opinion. So, give you an example of this. When we think about the example I gave you of the word embedding algorithm that scans CVs and is supposed to make decisions about who should be interviewed for a science and engineering job, we found out again and again is privileging men over women, right? Cara and like you and other amazing leading figures in my mind in both the journalistic and science and technology world should be hired to like look at what those systems are doing and guiding them, and working with them. The solution here isn't just sort of simply designing technology in a new way. It's building systems where the design processes are part of it, but the technologies are working with the right social stakeholders, the right types of individuals to make sure they achieve the correct goals. And we should be doing a lot of A/B testing. We should be looking at what kinds of interventions produce what kinds of outcomes, because it's as a thought experiment. We should be understanding whether the goals of these big tech corporations can actually be expressed in a non-antagonistic way with the underlying social outcomes and goals. I mean, as an example, in Beyond the Valley, in this new book, I interviewed some of the figures behind the Google AI lab in Accra, in Ghana. And the reason why that lab has been established is because a lot of Google's algorithms, especially their image recognition algorithm, have turned out to be quite racist and have misidentified on several occasions Black people with gorillas, these kinds of themes. And a lot of the content that is more Africa born and Africa served, and that's really important, right? Africa is the fastest growing population in the world, youngest population in the world, the place where the internet is most rapidly spreading in the world. So it's bad form, to put it mildly, and probably very bad for business, for Google's systems as they kind of gain more and more of a foothold on the continent, to be seen as racist or imperialist or what have you. So they're trying to establish this on the ground level, and part of the establishment of this is consultation and really carefully working with stakeholders, from diverse peoples to diverse speakers of languages and so on. And they're trying to build their algorithms in a better way. Of course, this is all to support Google's agenda of having more users and more data, and looking for new terrains to extract data and labor and attention from. However, if a model like that is the more universal model that we all take, not just one tech company, but a model where people have greater power and voice over shaping technology, that is a far better world we should be entering into. And right now, we're not really overall heading in that direction. And I'm deeply concerned about that. I'm concerned about, us kind of signing on to 5G networks without really understanding the privacy issues involved, or the even the Internet of Things interoperability problems. So there's just a lot of you know this, like, throughout history, scientific and technological innovations often come much more rapidly than political and social ones, because we're messy as human beings, right? It's a messy thing. So, but that's why I want us to get it going, and that's what I've been trying to do in influencing a couple of the campaigns, and and also trying to write a lot of mainstream op-ed pieces. One, I wrote a piece for The Guardian about 2 weeks ago, basically saying, "Hey, it's time for a digital Bill of Rights here in the United States, and here's what that looks like." Stuff like that.
What do I would love to hear, like, because you have traveled so much and you've interfaced with so many policymakers, but also so many like citizens, everyday voters and people who are actually the end user of a lot of this type of technology and innovation. I think sometimes I have something of a biased sampling, when I interview really bright minds and we talk about these very kind of progressive social justice and ethics oriented approaches to future technology. But then, I might turn around and share science news on social media and then see this very pernicious backlash of like men's rights activists or like anti social justice warrior kind of, this, what we were just talking about earlier, this idea of like, there's like the woke people and then there's like the people who are like, trying to suppress wokeness or whatever you want to call it, whether we want to call it like a white nationalist movement, a neo-Nazi movement, or it's not as severe and it's literally just a group of people who don't like change and they don't like that, the voices of the powerless are getting louder and louder. And so I guess my question for you is like, when you're out there in the world, like really in the world, do you find that the overwhelming majority of people actually want to see a more egalitarian future and actually want to see, support for the voiceless so that um, every person is at least at a basic level offered human dignity? Or do you see that the pushback is almost as strong as the individuals who are fighting for, civil justice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like what I see almost everywhere I go, and I've done field work in, I don't know, 20 to 30 countries, and myself traveled to about 80 countries in our world since I was a kid.
Wow.
And it's just been so eye-opening for me. A couple major thoughts. One is, most people, when they feel a sense of their own individual or familial security, are actually very capable of great amounts of empathy, generosity, and compassion. And I think people realize, especially in local communities, whether it's a neighborhood in a city or a smaller community, a rural community, or even a suburban community at times, that people can kind of understand that, at least implicitly, that there's a linkage between public welfare, community welfare, and or social welfare and their own welfare. And you could see that with, if you look at a lot of data around, that's just a truth. If you look at data, for example, around property value, here in the United States, if what I care about is the value of a house I buy, that is very highly correlated to the quality of the public school district, not the private school district, but the public school district. There's no private, but no, not the private school, but the public school district. Or public health is very obviously very positively correlated to lifespan and life expectancy. So these so-called discrete boundaries between the individual and social are actually a big myth. And I think a lot of people, when they feel individual senses of security, are able to kind of lean in socially and in a more empathic way. But here's the big finding is, and this is just really amazing for me to see. Always, I mean, for so many years, so often, all over the world, Cara, I've seen collective systems in place. So
Hmm.
in many communities, businesses are run collectively, cities or municipalities are run collectively. There's even like cosmologies and belief systems that are collectivist in their nature. And I'll give you two examples of this. One,
Okay.
both of which I write about in Beyond the Valley in this new book. One is a story I tell of the largest community owned and built cell phone networks in the world. This is built by indigenous peoples in southern Mexico and the Oaxaca region. Also, it's spreading into Colombia, Brazil, Nicaragua, West Papua, which is in Indonesia, but next to Papua New Guinea. There are models of communities saying, hey, we don't have cell phone access. Hey, we don't want to get ripped off by Movistar or Telcel, basically the Latin American equivalents to Verizon and AT&T and Comcast. And they don't even want to come here because we're not worth the investment to them because we're not rich enough and there's not enough of us and we're in mountains and rainforests and so on. So they just built it themselves. They built it themselves. They own it themselves. They maintain it themselves. And all of the value that the network is creating is supporting jobs and digital literacy and new forms of education in these communities. And this links to cosmologies and political philosophies that have existed in these communities. These are Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mixe communities. Thousands of people now have their own collectively owned cell phone networks. These communities have these philosophies. They call them comunalidad, which means like commonality, or tequio. Tequio is translated as doing good work. And so there's this idea that when you're in a community, you do stuff and you get stuff. There's this kind of idea of, like you live your life partly for yourself and partly for others, and others do the same toward you. And this is a model I also saw across the board in East Africa. So I did field work for Beyond the Valley for this new book in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Ethiopia. It was so interesting. And what you see in many of those countries all over the board are cooperatively owned enterprises. So, we're talking about businesses, we're talking about profit-making businesses, but workers in those businesses either own those businesses or have greater equity in those businesses. And that's true with businesses of all forms, whether they're involving things like mobile phones or technologies, or even when we're talking about public, like taking transit within a city. So in Nairobi, the main way in Kenya, which is a booming new silicon savannah, that's what they call themselves. You see people taking these minivans that will be blasting Bob Marley music, or like they'll be like, I remember showing I showed a picture of one of them in this book in Beyond the Valley of Nas, the like hip hop performer, like a big poster of his in these vans. And the vans take you from wherever you are to wherever you want to go. You might have to get off at another street corner and catch another van, but they guide you. And these systems are all collectively owned, all these forms of transit, and millions of people are using them all over the world. So I guess the point I want to make is when you get out of sometimes the bubble that we sometimes feel like we face here in the United States, where we feel like, hey, Cara, if you do well, that means I'm not going to do well. That sort of fear and anxiety. And you start looking at what's actually happening all over the world, you realize that kind of a kind of collective form of thinking and consciousness is far more common than not.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting how easy it is to become, I think, cynical, and how easy it is to become really, really pessimistic when you are, I don't know, I don't want to say treading water, but when you stay in one place. I think that it's unfortunate that you have to be in a somewhat privileged position to be able to leave home and to be able to experience the world and all the multifaceted things that it has to offer, because, or at least historically, right now, obviously, because of global internet, we can actually visit other places without going there. But there is something to be said about the perspective shift that happens when you experience other peoples and other cultures that is, like, I think, unparalleled. It's just very difficult to have that kind of cognitive and emotional uh, opening if you don't get the hell out of Dodge and like actually see what it's like in other parts of the world.
Yeah, a lot of us we're stressed out, right? We're overworked in this country. We're working harder, more hours and making less. And this is particularly true for the youngest generation. My students at UCLA are going to come out of a public university, and one of the top public universities in the world, or top universities in the world, but they're going to come out with $50,000 to $100,000 of student debt, which means they're already going to often move into professions where they're not able to really innovate or be entrepreneurs in a more like collective way, or even take risks and do things that are better for society that may not be paid well, like
Yeah.
being a social worker or being like a public educator or what have you. We're setting this up with the system is wired right now in a way that that shifts away from this and keeps us in this mythical world of zero sum. And what I want more than anything, and I'm sure as heck gonna fighting for in my books, in my writing, in my public advocacy, in my speeches, in my interviews with awesome folks in the media like you, is for our world, which is increasingly digitally mediated and technologically mediated, to lift all of us up. To lift all of us up. I mean, the internet is so amazing. The internet was funded by public taxpayer money. I know it's not the same now as it was then, about 50 years ago or so. But it's remarkable, right? I mean, the internet kind of came out of public investments, and it started at UCLA with the ARPANET. And what we can't do is maintain a system where all the profits are privatized and all the costs are borne by society. And that's exactly what I'm trying to combat, because I really think we have a great opportunity to take this digital world in a more inclusive, in a direction that's good for businesses, but also good for everybody else. I mean, the businesses, the big tech businesses have found a model that has made them incredibly lucrative and incredibly highly evaluated. But I also challenge them to think about whether there are other models through A/B testing where they can actually continue to have the value that they have, or what have you, but not at the cost of everybody else. So I like moving away. I mean, I did talk to folks about regulatory issues, antitrust issues. We hear a lot of that with the campaign right now, and I think that's part of what should be considered. But I don't think that's the only way in which we can tackle these challenges that we see right now.
Well, and it makes me really wonder, obviously what you're doing in your academic work and what you're doing, maybe even more importantly in your outreach work is it's fundamental. Like it's so necessary to this story, to this, I guess, quote unquote progress, that these considerations be front and center, and that we approach this from all angles, and that we always think about downstream effects. And I guess it makes me wonder, like, we don't really often see as consumers, like, what's happening behind the scenes, right? Like,
Yeah.
we get a new product, we get like an iPhone in our hands and we go, this is great. And then we don't think about like what goes into manufacturing it, what kinds of like rare earth metals are going into it, who is on the factory floor. We don't think about all the different university settings where the individuals were developing the technology, or the Silicon Valley type settings. And we don't think about all of the voices that go into deciding what's ethical, what's not ethical, what works, what doesn't work. And so I guess my question is like, how large is the population, the sample of individuals who think about these things the way that you do, who are actually approaching this from an ethical, person-centered, humanistic, and like sociological perspective? Is it just like, is it a small group of people kind of yelling from the outside, or is it a fundamental change that we're starting to see at the core of development?
Yeah, I mean, it's growing. I mean, I think there are more and more journalists, scholars, public interest kind of organizations, from the ACLU to others, that are weighing in on these issues. I mean, but it's usually around very specific issues. Like, for example, the ACLU has filed lawsuits and has spoken out about how facial recognition technology has been sold by Amazon and others to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in the context of their rounding up so-called undocumented immigrants. So say you were someone, say, either of us actually were supportive of President Trump's policies on detentions or on rounding people up and potentially deporting them, at least detaining them. I don't support that at all. I find it cold-hearted and brutal. But
Yeah.
say I did support it. Well, here's the problem. Those facial recognition technologies are misidentifying people who are documented as undocumented, right? And so, this is an example of, the ACLU has spoken out about that and shown examples of how the fact that mugshot databases, again, the data sets that these technologies are learning from are dominantly, Latinx. And so as a result, these so-called positive matches for identification by the facial recognition system that is connected to, police body cameras are misidentifying people as, as having, as not being documented. So this is not okay, right? And so my point here just a way to answer your question is, yeah, there are a lot of organizations, scholars, journalists speaking out, but I think what we really need to do is all come together. It can't just be, I having, these concerns about, the hiring of women in science and technology and AI systems and automated systems moving forward. You have this concern about antitrust issues, or this third person has some concerns around disinformation and hate speech and or Twitter or Facebook's political ads policy. We have to cohere. We have to come together. And the reason why is people often think my work is about the internet, or, oh, well, maybe we'll do a story about big technology and then we can bring you on. This is sometimes what I hear from producers. I mean, I for example, have been trying to pitch Bill Maher's people, and I keep almost getting there and then not getting there because they're like, oh, well, we might do a story about big tech. I'm not talking about big tech. I mean, I am. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the language, the everything in our lives, Cara, from how we get the news, to how we get access to housing, to how we get bank loans, to how we get insurance, to how we interact, how our policing system functions. All of that is expressed through the language of data and technology and algorithms and AI, and that is only going to increase moving forward. This isn't just about individual privacy. It's about everything. It's more about the new language of human possibility and the new language of human foreclosure of possibility, right? So
absolutely.
that's why we got to get it right. And that's why I'm trying going gonzo, trying to figure out a way to kind of get into these spaces of visibility around these themes, because it's not even about me, it's about these ideas. And I'm kind of trying to bring all of these different themes together in Beyond the Valley. It's a very broad book. It's looking at all of these different themes concurrently and trying to tell a story of how we can humanize and get technology on the right path moving forward, and the internet especially.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that it's really important that before we end our conversation today, that we talk about a couple of those stories. So I would love to hear, you've mentioned a couple of things. You've mentioned these kind of facial recognition issues and things like that. But what are some of the things as you've traveled the world to tell these stories? I mean, as I'm looking through your book, obviously there's a whole kind of section on global disinformation, the Cambridge Analytica story, sort of like when interpersonal or geopolitical conflict meets the internet. But you've also you've got a whole section on the gig economy, which is kind of interesting. I mean, that's not something that I think comes to most people's minds when they start to think about inequality digitally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, increasingly, work has become, the social contract associated with work, which is really a kind of a standard kind of aspect of our economic history in the United States, and actually much of the advanced industrial world, that has been broken. And that's something that, I'm a national surrogate for Senator Sanders on this campaign, but but this particular theme is something that I discussed with Elizabeth Warren about, mm-hmm. and what do I mean by that? Well, historically, there was an understanding with the so-called 40-hour work week that would be sufficient, no matter what the job was, to do a bunch of basic things. Have healthcare, like strong basic healthcare, uh,
Sure.
education, enough money to afford your life, and hopefully buy a house. And that doesn't mean you can maybe live in uptown Manhattan, but you would be able to do that somewhere and in a desirable place. So what has occurred as work itself has been interpreted and filtered and kind of processed through digital technology platforms, is work has essentially become fragmented and parcelized. And if you look at some interesting macroeconomic studies of who the working class is in this country, you'll see a big misimpression by the mainstream media. The working class in this country are not merely angry white dudes who voted for Trump in the Midwest and what have you.
Mhm.
We're actually talking about women of color, and most importantly, the youngest people. This is the first generation in the history of this country, if you account for inflation, to earn less than its parents in the history of this country. And
Wow.
life expectancy, Cara, I'm sure you've been following this, is dropping in this country.
Mhm.
So those are signs of some form of like overall decay and cohesion, right? And so with the gig economy, there have been some studies. For example, I cited in Beyond the Valley a study done by MIT's economics department, showing that if you kind of adjust for costs and so on, Uber drivers make $4 to $5 an hour, are not insured when they don't have passengers in the car.
Oh my God.
It's brutal, right? And obviously collective bargaining is not part of the story, except we're trying to change that here in California, but that's not a
Mhm.
larger story. We don't see people having pensions or healthcare or any of this stuff, right? So what has occurred is increasingly work has been farmed out through outsourcing. We can see that with call centers or content moderators, on Facebook, who are the people who are looking for hateful content to try to flag it and take it down. But those are people who often, in these within these very horrible working conditions in Manila or in India or in Nigeria. They're awake in the middle of the night. I mean, this is not the way work should go when it comes to the new digital economy. So, the gig economy, and from another perspective, also might be an intermediate stage toward a world where more and more jobs are automated. And I have no problem with automation, just like I have no problem with AI or technology. It's always about the question of who can these innovations serve? Who can these innovations serve? And so, there's evidence showing that, gig workers, who are, for example, driving for Uber, are having data collected about, every drive, there's so much intimate data that's collected, and that can allow, for automated vehicles to optimize for, Uber's attempt to kind of capture and dominate the market, as well as Uber's attempt to minimize its costs, right, with automated vehicle systems. Similarly, in Amazon fulfillment center workers, there's been some stories out about how they have wristbands that are documenting their productivity and their actions and what they are doing and what they're not doing. That ostensibly also will be to train robotic systems who will replace those forms of work. So work is precarious, and I'm not again saying we should go back to the way things were before digital technology. Obviously, that's just silly. It's here to stay. It offers lots of wonderful benefits. It offers the ability to be flexible. It offers the ability to accumulate a great amount of money. But that money needs to be made in a way that lifts everybody up. And I've had several conversations with folks connected to the former Andrew Yang campaign about themes like dividend programs and universal basic income. That's one of many possible pathways we can take to make sure that this current stage we're in, which is gig economy on steroids, doesn't turn into an even worse situation moving forward. This is all on the backdrop of a country where, three people have equivalent wealth to, I think, around 180 million people,
Oh
and
God.
and a global world where 8 people have equivalent wealth to about 3.9 billion people. So, technology is not responsible for these transformations. But if we move toward a future which we've been talking about this morning, where more and more we're going to just delegate our lives to these private corporate held technologies. It's going to make the situation even worse, and that's going to create huge polarizing effects on our society. And that's what we're already seeing the spillover onto with, the election of 2016 and some of the polarization that we see right now.
Well, and so I thought maybe it would be important to talk about that a little bit because it is in the book and you do touch on this, but obviously I think there's even more that you can share with us today. It's just more up to date information about, the work that you've been doing, not just at your institution, not just in, traveling the globe to try to collect as much kind of ethnographic information about the human technology interface, but now the political advocacy that you've been involved with leading up to the 2020 election. So I would love to know, like, how did you choose sort of which candidate you have decided to work for in depth? You mentioned that you have done some work with Elizabeth Warren, but now you're pretty much working specifically with Bernie Sanders, that you're a
Completely.
surrogate. I don't even know what that means. So I'd love to know more about that. And yeah, just kind of like what has that process been like and where's your head at with regards to the election coming up?
Yeah. And I know over the years, we've talked about some of the frustration for us as academics and scholars where we sort of feel like, hey, we're writing about public issues, about larger issues, the larger societal issues, but we don't want our work to start and end in the academy or maybe just a couple, mainstream media pieces. We really, and I'm a full professor at UCLA. It's very important to me to actually align with our stated mission on campus of really serving the public interest, really standing for these principles, this appreciation of our of diversity and public knowledge and public education. Those things matter a great deal to me. And so, as I was writing this book and pulling different contexts together, I spoke to such a wide range of people all over the world and a lot of prominent, American politicians as well, from Eric Holder to Elizabeth Warren to David Axelrod, from the Obama administration, the CNN pundits to even folks who are very much on the left, like I talked to Noam Chomsky. That was really amazing. And, it just was really interesting to kind of pull this together. And I started to realize, I don't want this book to be what I contribute. And, I don't want Beyond the Valley. I don't want to just say, hey, read the book and that's all good. When we
Yeah.
understand that books have their own meaning, I love books. Uh, but what I'm trying to get at is not starting and ending with the book. And so I saw, here is an opportunity. There's this, there's a lot of energy underway as we move in toward the 2020 election. And I was looking at the two candidates that I felt most stood for the public interest, not like tricky, evasive sort of language, and just kind of really had a track record of standing for, public education, for workers, for unions, for even social movements, for people of color, for these causes, for our larger, fabric of America. And for me, there was no question that the two candidates were Senator Warren and Sanders, based on their track records, and based in this particular case, I was just so blown away by the people in this time, not as much in 2016, who were actually leading Bernie Sanders' campaign. Faz Shakir, the
Oh,
campaign
okay.
manager, is
Hmm.
I don't know him well, but he was one of the heads of the ACLU, and I had spent a few hours talking with him up just like 2 years ago. And it was like blown away by the conversation. My friend Rafael Navar is the head of California for Bernie's campaign. He was one of the highest ranking Latino union leaders in the whole country, and he's someone I've known probably at least 10 years. He's like a buddy of mine, And you kind of are like, wait a second. You see these people, and you realize it's not about him. It's not about Bernie. It's about all of us. It's not simply about
Yeah.
that. And that's kind of why I'm so into it. I think and my role for Senator Sanders' campaign is to assist with policy when I can. So one policy that I helped with a little bit was the Internet for All program, which would incentivize small municipalities, community organizations, public institutions to also, would incentivize them financially to be investors and entrepreneurs in providing internet connectivity to their communities so that we could have actually way more competitive free market around getting internet access and mobile connectivity than we do right now. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but or that we have far inferior speed and bandwidth of connectivity per the price we pay compared to countries like South Korea. I mean, like a dozen plus
Yeah.
times worse connectivity for the cost than in South Korea. But that's also true in France, in Germany, in a number of countries in the advanced industrial parts of Europe. So that's not acceptable. So why not we figure out ways to even the playing field and give more opportunities to more people to be innovators in the space of broadband and mobile connectivity. So that's just an example of a plan. And the reason why that matters is that creates jobs, that gives people greater digital literacy. It improves technological forms of education. So it's never just about, giving someone money. It's about what you can create, what you can create in the capacity of everybody to be innovators in this technology world moving forward. So I kind of work on things like that. And for them, I try to, for the Sanders campaign, we have the Super Tuesday coming up. I've been trying to, get as a surrogate. I just defend the campaign and the campaign's policies when I'm asked to by the campaign. I talk on the issues that I feel most comfortable about, which would be themes like public education, obviously technology and the internet, even some themes like the Green New Deal, and thinking about these ideas and just recognizing that this is not even about, there are a lot of people I believe who support Senator Sanders that may not even like him that much personally, but they realize what he stands for and what this larger campaign stands for, and I think that's kind of why I'm signed up for it. And we try to be very issue focused and not malign any other candidates. There are other excellent people up there right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear you say that, and it's good to hear you say what you say about the people, that it's not just about Bernie, that it's about all of these people who are working with him so closely. I think that one of the things that's been sort of frustrating for me, and I'm trying to develop a fully kind of hatched viewpoint about this. So as this comes out of my mouth, it may not be a fully developed kind of thought. But lately, I've been a big Elizabeth Warren advocate since the beginning, and I see her slipping in the polls in such a kind of deep, desperate way. And obviously, I am going to support any Democratic candidate that gets the nomination because my view is that Trump cannot win again. I say that, but like I kind of don't really think that about Bloomberg. So it's like, please just don't let it be Bloomberg. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like, oh God, he's not even a Democrat. But I think that when it comes to the sort of Warren Sanders, I don't want to call it a rift, but change that's been occurring lately. And it's interesting that you got kind of on the Sanders campaign. Obviously, it looks like as of right now, we'll see what happens in Super Tuesday, but as of the way things are trending and polling, he is on track to get the nomination. And again, nothing against him because actually I'm going to vote for him if he gets the nomination. But there's something deep inside my soul that feels like the reason Warren is not doing as well as she absolutely should be doing is because she's a fucking woman. And it's frustrating for me to watch this person who is so well positioned, who is such a, policy genius and who has been such an advocate for individual citizens' rights, consumer rights for so long. And just to see that people, they just don't care. They just don't think about it. And literally, I worry that the reason that she's not doing as well as she's doing is simply because people are like, oh, a woman? Nah, it's not going to happen.
I think the threshold by which women are evaluated by on a widespread level in our country, they're held to far higher and often totally unreasonable and unrealistic standards. And I totally agree with you and understand that, and I think it's totally inappropriate that that Senator Warren should be sort of dismissed or looked down upon for her gender. I mean, that's just absurd. It's awful. And I know for a fact that that Senator Sanders, despite some of the feistiness we're seeing right now,
Yeah.
has a great deal of love and respect for her. That's something that multiple high up people have told me on the record, off the record in the campaign. I also just
Well,
want to
and
say
really, how
this.
could they not, right? Because they're so
Yeah.
similar in so many ways in
And
terms
they've
of policy.
and
And
you know what?
yeah,
They've
like,
worked together for 20 plus
mhm.
years. And actually, even in
Yeah.
2016, Bernie wanted Warren to run. And, he even admitted it. And when she chose not to, because I don't think she wanted to contest Hillary Clinton, he's like, I'm going to because I need to push these progressive issues into the
Yeah.
public sphere.
Interesting.
And a lot of the people high up in Bernie's campaign, from the press secretary to the national political director, are these amazing powerhouse women of color. And so that is
Mm.
something that I'm relieved by and I appreciate a great deal.
Yeah.
And that's partly what I was referring to when I was talking about this campaign being very different than 2016. It was pretty white male based, in the higher
Hmm.
leadership positions. And it's not simply, and they're great guys who were leading the campaign in 2016. I've met Jeff Weaver briefly. He was super nice, but I think now, I think Bernie recognized that things had to be different. And, Faz Shakir, the campaign manager, is the first Muslim to be a campaign manager in the history of this country. You know what I mean? It's like, and
Wow.
these are all
That's
like young
incredible.
people. I mean, everyone's like, these people we're talking about are in 30s, 40s. There are some
Hmm.
people who are even in their late 20s in high leadership positions. It's incredible. I mean, the deputy campaign manager, Renee Spellman, is a black woman who is just
Hmm.
super impressive. And I feel like she probably just graduated. So I almost feel like she just got out of college. She's so youthful,
Yeah.
even though, it's not true, but still,
That's amazing. No, that's so good to hear too, that like, you live, you learn, and you correct, mistakes. And that's really what this is all about, right? Is looking and saying, what could we do better? Okay, we have to have more voices and we have to have voices that represent the people. And obviously that's kind of the whole point of your book. And of course, the whole point of like what the hell it is that we're all doing here. So I know that you have to go because you have to go speak. But before you do, I was hoping, Ramesh, that last time you were on the show, I just looked, was 3 years ago. And
Has
so
it been
I
that
honestly,
long?
yes, it
Wow.
was
Oh my
February of
gosh.
2017.
Oh my
I,
gosh.
I
Wow.
know. I honestly don't remember what your answers to my final two questions were at the
Okay.
time, but
Okay. Yeah.
I would love to see if maybe those answers have changed or how they've
Sure.
evolved. So yeah, let's take a stab at it.
Okay.
What are you kind of upset about? What keeps you up at night? What are you not happy about when it comes to the future, and what are you genuinely optimistic about?
Yeah, I'm most concerned by the climate crisis. And
Hmm.
because it's not simply about the planet, our the threats to us as a species, but it's the fact that the effects of this climate crisis are going to deeply, deeply harm vulnerable people, again, indigenous people, the people who have always been treated badly by other systems that exist in our world. Everything from climate refugees to water, quality of drinking water to energy grid issues. All of this is we're already seeing it happen, and we see the kind of the ways in which Puerto Rico was treated relative to Texas. When
Yeah.
hurricanes hit, and this really troubles and bothers me, and that's why I think we have this great opportunity to innovate toward the future. With a Green New Deal that involves thinking about data and digital technology in new ways. So that's like something I'm super passionate about. But there are a lot of other themes: indigenous rights, human rights, economic justice, public education, science and humanities in a beautiful dialogue with one another. All of these are themes I'm also deeply passionate about. So yeah, what am I? So then the second question was like, what am I like excited about, and what makes
Yeah,
me
and like
hopeful? Yeah.
kind of like genuinely hopeful, not just like, oh God, this better save us all, but like, no, 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 it's looking good. Like I actually can kind of put myself behind this change.
Yeah. I think that there are that I think that Americans are waking up to the injustices that they currently face. I think that I think this sort of standard neoliberal political environment is being turned on its head. I think that people realize that a political system that is bought out by big corporations for obviously their own interest, right? I mean, is
Mm-hmm.
not going to work well as a larger political system. I think people are starting to recognize that the seams are being pulled apart. And so for me, I am very, very hopeful by the sense that I have that Americans are very, two things. One is I actually believe that, I mean, this is such a massive generalization, but I've traveled all over this country, as have you. I find many Americans to be very, on an individual and interpersonal level, to be very humane, loving, generous people. We give far
Yeah.
more to philanthropy than any other country. It's just something that's not known. And I do feel that more and more, despite these problems with the internet and our media, Americans are starting to realize what's BS and what isn't. And I feel like we have an opportunity right now, like starting like on Tuesday, to kind of like make
Mm-hmm.
a transition to find a new path forward, one that brings everybody up, lifts everybody up. And, I think I see that, and that gives me great inspiration. And the other thing I'd say that gives me so much inspiration, Cara, is, when I get to travel around the world, I just see people who have so little being able to do so much with so little. And it's not to exoticize or fetishize them. I just find that deeply inspiring. I give examples in Beyond the Valley of people taking, electronics in landfills and in dumpsters, not even dumpsters, just like open air landfills, and building new phones out of discarded and recycled electronics. I mean, I see these
Yeah,
kinds of
that's
other
incredible.
models. I saw people building 3D printers out of 60% e-waste, electronic waste in Kenya. I could
Wow.
not believe that. And the printers they were building were outperforming American and Chinese ones, and they were a fraction of the cost. And they were far more technically robust because they were built by innovators, like grassroots people on the street for their own communities. So I just really,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that gives me great hope on an overarching level is the creativity that is part of the human spirit, and the incredible diversity that exists in our world, where people, not in an angry way, but in a hopeful way, carve out paths of love and self-determination and sustainability for themselves and their families and their communities. And that's why people are always asking me, Ramesh, you're writing about all these negative things and all these challenges in Beyond the Valley and in these campaigns and blah, blah, blah. How are you not a Debbie Downer? And I'm like, well, I just see so much that gives me hope. I see so much that gives me hope. And it's not just hope, it's action. I see it happening right now, and I want to be part of that. And so I just want to invite everybody to engage with me on Twitter at Ramesh Media. Check out the book Beyond the Valley, and please reach out to me. I'm just part of our community, and I just appreciate you for having me on this morning, Cara.
Here. Ramesh, thank you so much. This was so enlightening, and it was honestly really inspiring. I'm feeling like very fired up here at the beginning of my day.
Well, I hope I'm honored, and thank you. And I look forward to the next time we get to talk. I always enjoy it. It's great to talk to you.
Absolutely. Yes. And everyone listening, I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.